Well, hello, Hawkesbury Valley family. We have the privilege of being at Pete and June Davies' house in the beautiful Nana Glen. And we have made this trip because we want to hear the story of Hawkesbury Valley Baptist Church. And Pete was the very first senior pastor of Hawkesbury Valley. So I just thought it'd be great, Pete, if you could tell us the story of how you came to be there, about the beginnings of this church, and just some of the things that form the DNA of Hawkesbury Valley.
Sure. Beginning was probably, at that stage, a group of people back in, I guess it was 91 or somewhere around about that, were wrestling with the question of would they start a church in the Hawkesbury? Would it be a Baptist church? Would they call a pastor? And just through some friendship links with people in that group, they'd heard about us. We were just finishing up at Hornsby Baptist Church. So I'd been an associate there. And they contacted us and asked would we be vaguely interested in church planning. And I'd done a course at college, which was kind of a bludge subject, just get the numbers up, and it was about church growth. And I realised that there was actually some stuff, it wasn't just a whim of the Holy Spirit, that there was some stuff you could do to actually, see movement. I was interested, they were kind of interested. They were looking for a non-traditional kind of church. And I had an earring, a ponytail, I have a motorbike at that stage, but I didn't look back in those days. That was unusual. So I think they liked that as well. Yeah. Takes a bit of imagination these days.
So that was the end of 1991, did you say?
So they interviewed us. We said yes, we would come. And we started pretty much in February of 92, I think.
That's very fast for a Baptist process, Pete.
Well, they didn't know process.
Okay.
I think they jumped on at the stage, the association, then the Baptist Union were they were jumping on any horse that looked like it was going to start a race. And so there was a group that were going to start a church anyway. They said, well, if it's Baptist, we'll get behind it. And they did. They did some great stuff in supporting us in the early days. But we were always going too fast for them in one sense. And then when it came to actually becoming an affiliated church, we were going too slow for them because we had other stuff on the agenda. But it was a bit of a whirlwind start. And that probably indicated the first few years of the church. A bit of a blur of having to go and seeing what was happening and making lots of decisions on the move. We started in a home, and a decent sized home, and we quickly outgrew that. When people heard there was something new happening in the Hawkesbury, we had people coming out of the woodwork. So we grew very quickly from about a dozen, 15, up to about 30 or 40 within about a month or so.
Oh, wow.
And so we moved to the community centre, spent a year in the community centre, and then moved to the local school a few doors up in Glossodia. So that was kind of the beginning. Then I had a plan because I'd been to college, I'd done the subjects, I'd read the books, all to find out that God wasn't God's plan. And so it probably took the best part of a year for him to knock that out of me and kind of go, let's just do it the way I tell you. But that was a good journey.
So do you remember some of those key things that you felt like the Lord spoke to you in those beginning times?
Sure. One of the most powerful things that came out, I remember we were in a leaders meeting, and it was just, I can't remember who said it, but I knew when I heard the words, I thought that's God speaking. And the words were, we will reach, or the church will reach the community through children and youth. In other words, we'd reach the families, but that was the doorway. And it just, when it was spoken in our leaders meeting, we used to meet every Tuesday morning for breakfast, and we just thought, that's God. And I would still say, and it resonated right through the time. The other early thing, and it wasn't so much God speaking, but the leaders responding. We had a constitution, because in those days, as a fellowship, you had to have a constitution, and it was about one page. But it was a legal document according to the association, the union, and the first thing they ever added to that was, they put it as appendage in the Constitution, was they wanted me to take a day a fortnight or half a day a week. We used to call it just get it going off into the bush, but they just basically said you cannot operate as a pastor in the absence of spending significant time listening to God.
Yeah, wow.
And that was so typical of that. They said what we want is you with time in prayer, and typically so I used to go off for half a day a week and off into some of the beautiful country around the Hawkesbury, Borrolo and Cabbage Tree Point up along the Colo River, and with a journal and a billy, and kind of spend time listening to God, and learning to listen to God, because that wasn't my heritage. So so I would say that first emphasis that said we want to be prayer focused, and then very quickly God said that's part of the DNA. So if I talk about DNA, the three words that come to me is prayer focused. It would be being creative and risk taking. And they kind of just showed up at different times, but constantly. So one of the things we did in the prayer focused stuff, we used to do weeks of prayer. Every 6 weeks we'd shut down all the small groups and all the regular ministries. Youth group, when it eventually started, might have kept going, but and it was, we would go, this week is a focus on prayer, and we'd often have prayer meetings 3 times a day. So there'd be like early morning prayer for the guys, usually down by the RAF base, in that park across from the RAF base. There'd be somewhere in the middle of the day, and there'd be a coffee and dessert night at the end, and we would do that day after day after day, and that whole thing, what came out of there were dreams and visions and kind of stuff and impressions, and so that carried on. I can't remember how long that went, but that was about every 6 weeks for quite a number of years. So prayer was always an important part, and those people knew how to pray long before I got there. They taught me a lot about just getting on your knees and seeking God and praying, and so that continued.
Can you remember some of those big answers to prayer that you saw during that time?
Not so much. Well, yeah, for the church, because we wandered in. We had a church. We met in a home, as I said, for about a month before we outgrew it. And I had a plan that we were going to go for 3 months, and then it was the stage kind of, we were going to do this at Easter. There was going to be a big launch, and we found ourselves at the end of February kind of going, we need a new building. We went down to the local community centre at Glossodia and said, look, we're just seeing whether we could possibly get somewhere to meet. And at that stage, there weren't a lot of options. So Glossodia Community Centres, they said, well, surprisingly, we've just had 2 cancellations that would have been competing for what you want, and they just finished last week. One was a karate class and one was a yoga class, I think. There'd been another church. There'd been a number of churches tried to plant in Glossodia and in that area, but it was always out of the overflow. And when there were tough times, that got sucked back into the planting church. So we were about the third, but we had nowhere else to go. We could swim or we drowned. There was no sending church in that sense. But we got there and they said, surprisingly, yes, there is a booking. Yes, you can have it we only met on a Sunday night for about the first 18 months. Only had a night service, which was fantastic. And they said, would you be able to cope with $5 a week, $5 an hour? So we were renting that property. So we then had to get a trailer. We had a sign. One of the guys was a sign writer, and we put up an old projector screen, and you'd wind it up and it'd say Hawkesbury Valley Baptist Church meets here every Sunday night. And we thought we were pretty good until the lady across the road after a year said, I didn't know you were even there. Okay. So much for good advertising. The other problem was we'd had a lady who was key in the early part of the church called Rita Round, and just before we started the church, she was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer and given 3 months to live, which was a real shock. And we just started praying. And she went through chemo without any sickness.
Wow.
Her comment was, I'm really happy to go home and be with the Lord. She was probably in her late 60s at this stage. I'm happy to, the only reason I would like to hang around is to see this church win young people for Christ, because she was a scripture teacher. 16 years later, she passed away. So, you know, there were answers like that. There were, we had no idea of where money was coming through. And the second week after we started, the Baptist Association said, oh, hey, you know, there's a church that closed or amalgamated. They sold a building. They want to give you some money. And so
Wow.
we didn't know whether I was going to be one day a week as a pastor. And I started in a full-time role because of that. So there were...
Amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, there were lots of stuff. But, you know, you're out there having a go. Lots of failures.
Yep.
You know, you try stuff and you go. But the good thing was they were really gracious, and they were okay. Well, we won't do that again, or we'll try something different. So
Yeah, wow.
yeah, they were, and as I said, they were creative, so they were up for anything new, within reason. They were. How can I put this? They were willing to be non-traditional,
Yeah.
as long as there was an unswerving faithfulness to God's word and worship of God. They were people with real hearts for God. So I thought I would go in and do a bit of healing ministry, because some of them had had a bit of a rough time in a previous church. And I thought, you know, the first 6 months or 12 months, I'll really do some pastoral care, which is probably not my strong suit at the best of times. But there were no wounds. And the only thing they said to me as a non-negotiable when they were calling me was that you are to work for reconciliation with that other church. So that was at the heart of, you know, kind of. So I got blessed. I got, you know, some brilliant people with energy, with heart for God, willing to have a go. And so, and it was okay to make mistakes. So that's a pretty good mix when you're church planting.
Absolutely. I think an exciting thing for me hearing about this is that DNA still exists within the church. Like the
Great to hear that.
Emphasis on young people, the big faith, the willing to take risks, the permission to make mistakes. Like it's okay if it doesn't go completely right. We can just kind of pivot a little bit and try again. But as long as the word is being preached, as long as, you know, the worship is strong. And so I think that's really exciting to hear. So you talk about risk taking. What were maybe some of those big things you think about when you talk about that DNA of risk taking?
Okay. Often it was around money, because we had none.
Yeah.
And I mentioned probably last night as we chatted, Bill Cooley was our first treasurer. We got together at the end of the year and worked out that we'd spent $45 less than we'd brought in, so we thought we were winners. And it took about 4 years before we actually got the idea you're supposed to have a budget before you do this stuff. But we didn't know, and all that infrastructure wasn't there. I remember one night we had a guest speaker. It must have been about 18 months into the church, and we had a guest speaker. He was from India, and he told us this story about what money could do in India. And they said, like, for $35 a month, you could provide a motorbike instead of a push bike, and that meant that pastor, instead of pastoring 3 churches, could pastor 5 churches. Now, looking back, I thought that wasn't a kind thing to do, to try and give 3 extra churches to a church planter. But I'm sitting in the thing kind of going, I can inspire the people. Yes. We could just give up our 5-cent bits. And if we did that as a church, we could sponsor like 3 more churches in India. Yeah. And they were talking about some other stuff. They'd had a printing press to print Bibles in their own language, but they didn't have a building. So I'm thinking of, I'm going to get up after this guy speaks, and I'm going to inspire the church to give up their 5-cent bits and provide that for this church or this mission group in India. Mm-hmm. And June leans over to me and says, we should give them the offering, like the whole lot. And I'm going, that's crazy because, and I couldn't come up with a because. Yeah. And I'm going, okay. Now at this stage, we were week to week. So if we gave away the offering, there was no guarantee we'd get paid. Sure. So I got up at the end and I said, look, I've got this idea about, 5-cent bits, $35, we can buy a pastor a motorbike. Yeah. I said, my wife has just suggested we give the entire offering, we took it up at the end of the service. So this was before they'd given. And, you know, what do you reckon? You know, this is our decision-making process. You just said it and got feedback off in church service. And so someone put up their hand and said, well, we could give them half and half. You know, we could keep half and we could give away half. And so I said, okay, who thinks the 5 cent bit's my idea is a good idea? Not a single hand. What about the half and half one? And the lady who suggested it put up a hand. I don't think her husband even put up his hand. And then I said, what about giving everything we take up today? And every hand in the room went up.
Wow.
So my wage was about $400 a week at that stage. Our average income was between 5 and maybe 6. We were just a little bit above. So I'm thinking, well, we mightn't get paid this week. We took up the offering unannounced, $1,200.
Wow.
Way beyond, with no warning. People just reached in and it was just amazing. If you want to, this is a bit wider. We're not great. June and I still are not great. We weren't back then with finances. We'd run up our credit card to about $4,000. But we had a friend who owned a bank, which is really good.
Good friend to have.
Yeah, and he said, I said, I'm trying to knock off and it's killing us. He said, I'll give you an interest-free loan for $4,000. You pay off, which we did. And before we could make our first payment on it, he said, look, I'm changing banks and bank accounts. Just wait a couple of weeks. So we're waiting a couple of weeks. So the thing about risking $400 our wage, but giving $1,200, we bought an entire building in India.
Yeah.
The next day I get a phone call from this friend who says, Pete, I've got a friend, a businessman that I'm sending lots of work to in India who's a Christian. And he's asked, how do I tithe and how do I use my money? He said, I give to my church. And he told the story about using his business to provide an interest-free loan for a pastor. Mm-hmm. And he goes, how much is the loan for? And he said, oh, that's a $4,000 loan. So this businessman in India, where we'd just given the money, paid $4,000, obliterated that debt. We'd risked possibly $400. We still got paid. We risked $400. A businessman I've still not met to the day, a Christian businessman, paid a $4,000. These kind of things were happening often enough.
Yeah.
So there was that. What else? Risk-taking. We were, as I said, we were heavily subsidised by the association in the early days. And to the tune of about $1,000 a month or something like that. It was about half of what we were bringing in. The association, union in those days, said, look, you've got to learn to get on your own feet. And so they said, you've got to reduce it in the second year by 10%. So we went from about $1,200 to about $1,000 a month. But I was doing a church planning course with a guy named Les Scarborough at St Mary's. And his advice, he said, Pete, cut the umbilical cord to the association quickly. Don't be dependent on them. So they insisted on 10% and they were going to do 10%. So the next year we said, let's halve that. We'll cut $500 a month out of that. Okay, had no reason. If you looked at the books, there was never a reason to take a risk. There was always a reason to play it safe. But we did that and we cut that in half. And the following year we cut it completely.
Yeah.
And when we decided to cut all the support, there was, again, we'd been on 3 months of our worst giving in the whole year, and we're going to make this crazy, ridiculous, illogical kind of move. So we're sitting talking about it in a church meeting. It was a business meeting, and one of the guys puts up his hand and says, Pete, can we afford to do this? I said, no, that's an easy question to answer. No, we can't afford to do that. He said, Pete, why are we doing this? I said, well, that's what we're here with. We're seeing whether we think God's calling us to do that. Yeah. He said, I just wanted to know. He then voted for cutting that, and we cut it we cut that out, which was a huge step.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, we had a guy who was at college, and we decided to put him on staff. So we'd already kind of had no reason to do that. That guy was Mark Chappell.
Wow.
So we're saying, do we want to put Mark Chappell on as an associate?
Yeah.
We'd already just committed financial suicide. Same guy goes, Pete, I asked this 3 weeks ago. Can we afford this? Yeah, same answer, mate. No, we can't.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Well, we're checking, is God asking us to do this?
Yeah.
And 3 weeks later, they voted to put Mark and Rachel on as our first associate. This is like 1 or 2 years into a church plant. This is, and I remember Mark's mum, who may see this, just saying in the meeting, I think this is God's will, but it scares the daylights out of me. And see, it's not hard for entrepreneurs and risk takers to take risks.
Yeah.
But there's this incredible graciousness that comes when cautious or more cautious people follow you.
Absolutely.
And what an incredible privilege it was. So the next couple of days, I am overtaken by this incredible dread. Oh no, what have we done? The church will go under. What? And for about 2 or 3 days, I'm a mess. And I remember I'm driving down from our house in Freeman's Reach, kind of going, God, what is this about? I'm not like this. Yeah. And he just said, when you call people to follow you and take risks, this is what it feels like for them. Oh man, yeah. I'm glad I'm not that kind of personality, because it was really tough. But my appreciation, respect for not the entrepreneurs who will risk anything at any time, but the people that trust God. Yeah. We used to have a saying that you spell faith with 3 F's, faith, and and it was like that. So there were times like that. We started a craft group, ladies, 3 ladies, started a craft group for the community. They got some government funding, which we'd never done before. We didn't know, and some people said, "Oh, don't take money from the government." I'm going, "This is great. We can do more things more than our own budget, and the government will only give funds to community-based service." Yeah. So that both gives us money and pushes us into the community. And that ran for a number of years. The leaders kept getting pregnant, so for about 6 months, I led the ladies' craft group at the community centre.
I'm sure they loved you.
They learned a lot of woodworking skills and some. I was learning how to do candle making the week before I was teaching there.
Wonderful.
But they did, pardon me, woodworking. We did lead lighting and a whole heap of stuff like that. That was. But I grew up. When we talk about how does God put things together, I grew up in an all-female household.
Wow.
And I'm an only child, and my dad died when I was 6. So I had 2 cousins that came and lived with us, all females. Yeah. So I'm just I can sit in a room full of women and just be completely relaxed and just chat, and it's normal. So that didn't worry me. A couple of times, Mark used to come and he said, "How can you do that? There's just so many women there." Not his experience. Yeah. But that out of that craft group, we got connection with the community. We started with the university, the community health, the hospital and the community centre and our church started a thing called the Links program that served families who were under stress with young kids in the area for various reasons. That won government awards, and again on the smell of an oily rag. Yeah. So those kind of things. I'm trying to think of. I probably blocked out, mentally protecting myself of the things that we did wrong and that didn't work out. Yeah. When we started, I had a vision that God would grow the church to about 500, and I was scared to tell anyone because it was at that stage it would have been one of the largest Baptist churches in New South Wales. But God had placed this vision, and about 8 years or 7 years into the process, we're still kicking around about 100 people. Yeah. And I remember I was driving down and I'm saying, God, why did you give me a vision for a church of 500? It has been more often a weapon of Satan to discourage me than for you to draw me on. And he said, when you stand on the tee, what do you aim for? Golfing analogy. And I said, well, I aim for the flag, I aim for the hole. He said, do you expect to hit it? Not even on a par 3. No. He said, I gave you a vision. Your job is not to get there. Yeah. But I wanted you from the very start to have a vision bigger than yourself, that was bigger than your capacity, bigger than the church's capacity. I wanted you to aim for something larger. And I go, okay. And that took a lot of pressure off me, that I didn't have to feel a failure for not reaching the vision that God had given. But when I remember we were very comfortable, it was a happy kind of situation. And I talked about enjoy where we're at now because we're growing.
Yes.
And we had families leave the church because they said, we don't want it to get any bigger. I'm going, that's okay, because that probably saved both of us pain later on.
Sure.
So there's some of that kind of stuff was there.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm inspired hearing about the story of it, but also excited just to realise that a lot of this stuff is still there at the church.
That's great for me to hear too.
Oh, it's exciting. But thank you so much.
And the other thing that I would say is I've had a great run in ministry. To do a little bit of bragging in one sense. When I finished at Hornsby Baptist Church, I handed over to Steve and Kathy Bates, who I would say are some of the most spectacular Baptist pastors we have. When I finished at Hawkesbury Valley, I handed over to Mark Chappell, who took it way beyond where I could take it. When I finished or halfway through my work with the association, I handed church planning over to Steve Bartlett.
Oh, wow.
And then I handed church health over to Ian Altman. So I've had this great privilege of being blessed by handing it over to people better than myself, and then watching it. Shortly after I finished at Hawkesbury Valley, we went back and saw 11 people baptised down at the Gross River. And I didn't know even the name of about a half of them.
How wonderful.
Yeah, well, and someone said, is that hard for you as a pastor? Suddenly I'm going, no, it's like the Christian version of Amway that, I've invested in, and every time they have a win, I get a kickback.
Yes.
And I'm going, this is fantastic. So that's been, and so it's great to hear that DNA, that risk taking, the, being creative and all that kind of stuff is still there.
Yeah. Awesome.
God bless you. Or, hey, can I give you one last thing? Here's the first benediction at our first ever service. And it says, now unto him who is able to do immeasurably more than you can dream or imagine. And it goes on to say, to him be all the glory. That started us. May it continue. Dream big and expect God to do better.